Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Charlie Nicklin. I'm Chief Executive of IAgrE, and I'd like to thank you all for joining our May presentation today. I'd like to welcome Seamus Higgins, who is Associate Professor of Food Systems Engineering at Nottingham University. Seamus has an extensive background in the food industry, spending many years in a variety of companies and consultancy roles. In 2017, he joined Notts Uni to develop a new MSc in Food Process Engineering. Seamus's lecture today will look at some of the environmental and sustainability challenges around food and how the industry can embrace change. As usual with our lectures, everyone will be muted. If you would like to ask questions, please pop them in the chat at the bottom of the screen, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll unmute you so you can ask in person. Okay, I'll now hand over to Seamus.
Okay, well, welcome everybody, and it's a pleasure to do this lunchtime lecture for IAgrE. My name is Seamus Higgins, and I'm Associate Professor for Food Process Engineering at the University of Nottingham. And our lecture today is Food Structures for a Sustainable World. Think about food. Scientists tell us it's been the best part of 3 million years since we learned to walk upright. And think of how food has been the one source of fuel that has fueled all of that evolution. Think about it from society. Food production literally defines our societies, from hunter-gatherers, agricultural societies, to the industrial societies. And we look at that a bit more later on. Food, it's an integral part of our culture. The Chinese language is logographic as opposed to our ABC. But I love their two symbols for Jing or vitality, which is basically made up of rice and plant or vegetables. Think of the word carnival. It's a folk etymology going way back to Venetian times, which literally means farewell to meat. And it was part and parcel of their fasting period for Lent. That's part of 1,000 years ago. Food, well, it's a basic necessity of life. I was going to say food is love, but think about it. From the time we're born to growing up as children, our food and nutritional intake, or lack thereof, has a lifelong impact on our health and how we live, for better or for worse. Today's food industry has grown. It's a 12 trillion industry, representing greater than 10% of global consumer spending and 40% of employment. It's also forecast to grow at roughly about 5%. And we're seeing that growth rate right across the world in different countries. If you look at it from a regional perspective, the UK food industry is the largest manufacturing industry in the UK. It outperforms aeronautical and automotive, the two of them combined. Over 100 billion, employs 440,000, and I forget the exact number of figures in terms of factories, but it's huge. What's also interesting is the growth in highly skilled operatives within the food industry. As you can see, that's greater than 30-odd% now. It's no longer just a manual industry. But if we go back 2,000 years ago, probably where food engineering actually started, I'm just going to try and move a little window here. Just bear with me a second. No, it's not moving. I can only see half my notes. But 2,000 years ago, it was a guy called Vitruvius. He was a Roman general that actually invented the undershot water wheel and started the whole process of food processing without animals or without people. It was in the 16th century when Da Vinci immortalized Vitruvius with his famous sketch of Vitruvian Man. And as much as he celebrated it from an architectural perspective or symmetry, he could have also been celebrated as the world's first food process engineer. 19th century, coming into the Industrial Revolution, well, 1809, Nicholas Arpart, often referred to as the father of food preservation, came up with the concept of preserving food by way of a heated process and hermetically sealing the product in a glass jar. It wasn't much later when Brian Dunking started canning. On to the end of that, 1878, Henry Simon built the first steam flour mill based on a gradual reduction of milling wheat. Second Industrial Revolution, well, that was the start of mass food production and iconic brands, same brands that we have today. Early 20th century, there were only 12 cities that had a population of greater than 1 million or more inhabitants. Think of New York, population 3.2 million, of which 2.2 million were living in tenements, serviced by 25,000 open food carts. Think of the pathogens, think of the problems there was with that kind of setup. Brucellosis, diphtheria, scarlet fever, several gastrointestinal infections, Salmonella, E. coli, among others. Safety became a major concern. It was also the start of the production line when Henry Ford started the first production system, reducing the price of his Model T from $850 down to $230. And of course, the food industry were quick to follow suit. In fact, the process line, factory management, and mass production became part and parcel of what we know today. But the 20th century was also the birth of the management century. Good old Winslow Taylor set off a century-long quest for the balance between the things of production and the humanity of production. As some would say, between the people's people and the numbers people. So what is a food company's purpose going forward? Is it as per Drucker in 1954, where he said there is only one valid definition of a business, to create a customer? Or was it more as per Milton Friedman, who argued in 1970 that the sole purpose of a business is to create more profit for shareholders? And this kind of began the nascent food industry's conflict with business management theories rooted in economics. Combine that with the rise of capitalism and service-linked industries, globalization, market and trade liberalization, discount retail, and urbanization. And then, of course, as we've seen more recently, a shift, transitioning beyond just food safety and preservation methods to the mass production of branded convenience foods. If one looks at profitability from a food industry perspective, have a look at this chart, which runs from 1963 to 2014. As you can see, consumer staples with a growth rate of 13.3% were the highest profit generators. In fact, if somebody had had the foresight to invest $1,000 in the food industry shareholding in 1963, they would have been a millionaire a couple of years back. Despite all of these things, the 20th century actually defied all Malthusian predictions, which was predicted in the 19th century that the growing population would actually outpace the supply of food. Of course, that didn't happen. And if you look at the graph here, between 1900 and 2010, you can see the overall price of food has dramatically decreased relative to world population. So given the many achievements the food industry has achieved, well, in the past 2,000 years, or more recently in terms of food safety, price, taste, convenience, and an abundance of food supply with obvious profitable success, why would we need to change it? Well, we have problems. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation put a number on it. They're saying that for every dollar that we spend, or in terms of producing food, it's actually costing society $2. And that's including environmental, it's including health, and it's including all of the inputs that go into our current food industry. Indeed, the FAO more recently calculates that cost to be at least 10 trillion annually. Carbon emissions. We know that if we carry on the way we're going, if you take the white line here, we're looking at a 5% increase in overall global temperatures by the end of this century, with disastrous consequences. If we look at what's currently on the table with regards to existing policy development, we still overshoot that target at 3%. Effectively, we've got to look at reducing carbon emissions well below 2%. We need to take that down to at least 1.5%. And of course, greenhouse gas emissions from the agri-food system are higher than you might think. If you look at the combination here, farm gate, land use, and post-production, we're looking at approximately 30.8% of total carbon emissions, which is effectively 1/3 of global greenhouse gases. If we look at other environmental problems, such as land use, I mean, agriculture, we're using 51 million square kilometers. It's 50% of global habitable land. The agri-food system uses 70% of our freshwater resources. And our waste, that's causing eutrophication, roughly 70%. And again, if you look at it from a biodiversity perspective, wild animals basically make up just 6%, whereas our livestock is making up 94%. Our other problem, of course, is the rise in overnutrition from food, leading to obesity and other diet-related metabolic diseases. Obesity in the UK and the States has more than trebled in the past 30 years. And one of the, I think it's the World Health, predicts that 1 billion people will be obese by 2030. That's including 1 in 5 women and 1 in 7 men. Our rules of engagement, if that's the right word, for manufacturing came to an end at the turn of the last century, when we basically realized that nature does not have an infinite capacity to absorb the world's waste. No more than there are limitless resources in nature. I mean, we're not just talking about minerals for fertilizers, we're talking about a whole load of other elements. And that whole ethos of take, make, waste, it's gone. But going forward, we've got to look at different ways of doing things. We've got to look at greener products, cleaner production, better service, end-of-life manufacture. And of course, we've got to start recycling that waste produced. You know, I was talking earlier about food production defining our societies. With the debt and the reasons why of the Industrial Revolution, we need to think things differently. We need to look at creating basically a new food revolution. A recent paper of mine, in fact, combined with, I co-wrote this with Daniel Heft, who's the chairman of your Food and Drink and Special Interest Group. When we looked at re-engineering the food industry, it's obvious we need more engineers. And I presume I'm talking to engineers, so nobody's going to argue with me when you think of the Latin words for engineer: to create, generate, contrive, devise, and then that wonderful adverb, ingenium, cleverness. If we define engineering simply as the ability to make things or make things better, then of course it becomes a vital profession for solving global food challenges. And don't just take my word on that. You know, this is the decade of action as per the United Nations, where 197 different countries have signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. But if you take a closer look at them, or if you divide those factors or targets into different groups, when you look at it from a societal, economic, climate, water, soil, biodiversity, or even an individual perspective, one could plonk the word food in that center because it encompasses all of them. So going forward, how do we look at better sustainability. How do we feed 10 billion people by the year 2050 without using more land? I mean, if we carry on the way we're going to need another area twice the size of India to grow that product. And then, as we said earlier, we've got to look at lowering emissions. And okay, that's 2010. Taking it from 2020, we've got to get down to much, much lower targets. And again, that's where I believe engineering comes in. The problem with the food industry is, well, we've got a pretty poor performance to date. The food industry is indeed currently behind the curve. A recent Wall Street Journal survey on over 5,500 public traded companies, only one food business scored in the top 100. And of course, the future of the food and drink industry is going to see growing pressure for greater environmental and sustainability performance and transparency. Already we're seeing figures of 80% of consumers insisting on better sustainability from the industry. In a nutshell, I love this quote from Eric Shisenki, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. Just some food for thought, if you'll excuse the pun. Okay, so we got to look at changing the status quo. And you talk about status quo. I love the quote from, he was actually an ex-president of the US, Ronald Reagan, who once defined the word status quo as, look at the mess we're in. Now, we won't talk about his Latin capabilities, but basically, how do we change what's currently happening to make things much better? I put up some prompts there, defining what and why we need to change, identifying the barriers, setting realistic, measurable short and long-term goals, and of course, team development, working together as a team. If we look at food preservation processes, we've come a long, long way since Nicholas Appert first invented the first way of preserving food. And when you look at some of the technology we have available today, such as high-pressure food preservation, pulsed electric fields, incredible work being done with plasma technology. And then, of course, don't forget, we've also got natural preservatives, ozone, ionization, all of them big possibilities for actually preserving food as whole food. Looking after protein, looking after fiber, as distinct to looking at what's probably now referred to today as ultra-processing. Think of the opportunities Industry 4.0 gives us in terms of developing some of those new technologies. That's wide-ranging, from plant-based foods, insect proteins, food production systems, personalized foods, cell-cultured meat. Many, many possible new food technologies that can be adapted to better produce food. My favorite at the moment is a project known as Food from Air. This has been developed over the past 5 years by a company called Solar Foods in Finland. The actual first plant opened 1 month ago. And they're literally producing food from air. It's all the benefits of creating a perfect protein without the use of animal or land resources. It's a chemosynthesis system where they're taking single-cell hydrogenotropes, rapidly growing them in a bioreactor, and then drying them as a processed flour. But just look at this. Just look at the stats on this product. It's a 100% entirely natural product. Think of yeast or other ingredients that we've been using for years. 60 to 70% protein, 15% dietary fibers, 8% fat, and 5 to 6% mineral nutrients, along with all 9 of the amino acids. Possibilities are huge. Exploring waste, if we're talking about changing our waste or our waste practices of the past, as engineers, we all know what the first law of thermodynamics is about. You know, we can't change the energy usage, but we can certainly change the different types. And that's where there's huge potential for exploring different waste management technologies, be they physical, be they chemical, or be they biological. And if we talk about the biological aspects, again, one of my favorites is Billand. Now, you may or may not know Billand. Those of you that were very young engineers that started out with Lego, Billand is actually the home of Lego, okay? But they've now taken urban waste management way beyond any traditional setups. You know, they're taking all of the organic waste from households along with industrial wastewater. They're processing that through a wastewater treatment plant, okay? And then the sludge comes into, let's call it an energy factory. They're using anaerobic digestive systems to actually produce both heat and electricity for the town. The waste resources they're using for phosphor, they're also as a pre-ingredient for creating bioplastic, and they're also creating organic fertilizer. Now, think about this. The energy required to do all of that is roughly 1/3 of what they're actually generating. So again, think of waste management, and think of the opportunities that waste management can actually provide. The other side of it, of course, is reducing energy consumption, monitoring processes to conserve energy. I mean, refrigeration and chilling can account for anything between 50 and 80% of your energy usage. Using variable speed drives for electric equipment will reduce operating costs. Where we've come from with light emitting diodes now, you can change whole light systems for 1/100 of the energy costs. Likewise, the use of low power factor equipment can also help to provide sustainable energy, to reduce your existing energy. And of course, ingraining a culture of conservancy among employees is perhaps one of the most important steps any food and beverage company can take to reduce their overall carbon footprint. So from an engineering perspective, you know, if we got to look at developing a systems approach for setting targets, how do we do that? If I asked you to look at it from a process perspective, immediately you would say, yeah, not a problem. I will do my block diagram, which gives me the basic overview. Then I will look at a general flow or a P&ID. And then eventually we get all the facts together. I can produce my piping and instrumentation diagram. It's actually breaking it down into those 3 steps. Let's look at it from a different perspective. Defining the scope, okay, agreeing contracts, and balancing those objectives. Let's look at it even further. Why is a sustainability statement important? Sustainability vision theory means you're conveying the values and a lasting purpose, basically to guide employees as to what is really meaningful. And you're also overviewing that path towards realizing that vision. So from a mission perspective, define your overall sustainability vision statement. Okay? From an objectives perspective, what are the key objectives required to achieve this vision? That then can translate into the strategies. What strategies are required to achieve those individual objectives? And then, of course, last but not least, what are the tasks or the metrics? And of course, the timing and who is responsible in achieving it. In a nutshell, you're using a work breakdown structure. exactly the same as you would do with process design. Selecting the Global Environmental Sustainability Standard Agency, there are a number of them, and I'll overview them just now. But GRI is probably the most popular. It's used by more than 10,000 organizations in over 100 countries. The standards are advancing all the time, but it's dealing with the practice of sustainability reporting and enabling organizations and their stakeholders to take action. And from a justification perspective, that's economic, environmental, and social benefits for everybody. Kind of in cooperation with GRI, IAgrE a few months back published their sustainability metrics. I've given you a download link here. I'll be happy to put it in the chat afterwards to look at it. But this is a lovely 13-page concise document that allows you to actually measure your existing system or setup and how to create those metrics that you want to target and that you want to improve. It's basically an ABC of putting together your own sustainability matrix. And of course, when you're looking at that sustainability index, yes, we've looked at various process methods, we've looked at waste, but there's a lot more to it. Water management, we've had to cover that to a degree. Energy management, also think of your supply chain. The days when we were importing from 8,000, 10,000 miles away, longer term from a sustainability perspective, they're gone. Can you source local? Okay, look at your packaging, look at your transport, and basically look at human well-being overall. As I said, speak to the experts, and there are several of them out there. I've just overviewed for you the sustainability metrics from IAgrE. Stateside America, you've got the lead organization, Lead Zero, where they're looking at carbon, energy, water, and waste certification from a factory perspective. You've also got the British Standards Institute, and they're looking at carbon neutral products and their kite mark. As I said, GRI. And within the EU, I think 3 weeks ago, it has now been mandated by law where one's got to look at detailing your environmental and sustainability matrix. So implementing the plan, okay? And yeah, I put a table together. Define that mission statement, define what you want to do, how you want to do it, and start getting those objectives in place and the strategy to achieve them. And of course, agreeing the contracts, getting the team on board, talking to stakeholders, and of course, management, and defining those measurement matrix. As always, with all contracts, it's a balancing exercise. So you've got to balance those objectives with design, talking to specialists, risk mitigation, and cost. Once you start measuring, then you can start specifying your baseline or defining future goals or where you want to go for them. Setting those goals, implement change, motivation, engagement, create project champions, and let them help to control some of those various strategies or tasks that are going to help you along the way. As always, it's continuous, so review the results, determine the results, evaluate success levels, and perhaps you might have to re-look at it and start again on some of these things till it becomes a continuous continuous circle for actually reviewing how you implement those sustainability goals going forward. As I said earlier, more and more consumers are looking for increased sustainability from the food sector. So if you've defined those goals and achieved some of them, then report them, include them in the audited statements at the end of the year, and coming back to your mission as to what you want to do in terms of changing things from a sustainability perspective, fly it, put it on the flagpole and say, this is what we're all about. I've thrown a lot at you. We're open for questions just now. But if we had to break down some of those processes, I've put up here 5 key breakdown pieces. Okay? As we said, as you would do with any process, manage through a structured work of product breakdown, user breakdown structure. Focus on results, not what to achieve, or sorry, not how to do it, but focus on what to achieve. Talking to experts, getting other insights will enable you to achieve it. Obviously, costs and other things have to come into the equation. Balance those objectives through the breakdown structure. Get everybody on board, management, stakeholders, and all of your colleagues from a work perspective or from a team perspective or from a company perspective. Give and receive appropriate feedback. People need attention, especially what they do best. Compliment people on how they're doing. And then last but not least, adopt clear and simple management reporting structures. Excuse me. So if we could take things from a better food perspective, we're calling this, and it's not my video, it's actually produced by Kerry Foods, but this is looking at our food industry beyond the horizon. I think it's worth a good look. They talk about looking after their 2 billion customers. I would see this as being more appropriate for looking after our 8 billion consumers that the food industry currently supplies. Interesting video, isn't it? So how do we take the food industry beyond the horizon? It's in your capable hands. Just for students that may be listening or maybe tuned in, if you're interested in furthering a career, sorry guys, this is a bit of a promo, but if you're interested in promoting a career within the food industry, don't forget our MSc in Food Process Engineering here at the University of Nottingham. And for colleagues who may think, well, no, I don't want to do that, I've given you a QR code there, which will actually take you to our MSc landing page, okay? And that landing page, it's got some information on the MSCs, but it's also got a link to a friend of mine's book called Food for Thought. And that book is free. I've given you some downloads, be it Amazon or be it Google or whatever. And I think it's really an interesting read. Khan did not want any royalties for the book. The book is free to download. So if you're interested in taking that one a bit further, it's called Food for Thought. So thank you for listening to me today. I've also put up my LinkedIn profile, and from time to time, I'll put out bits and pieces on the food and on the food industry. And yeah, I welcome new associates or anybody that can help. It's never going to be down to one individual. We need a concerted effort from all. So, on that note, can we go to questions? What does the agricultural engineer of the future look like regarding skills in order to meet those challenges? Very interesting question. I'm going to give you a kind of a longish answer to that. Because, you know, I kind of evolved into food, okay? I started my career as an electrical engineer. And I find it fascinating that here I am in the chemical and environmental school. And I only joined as an academic about 7 years ago, okay? But if I look at current industry and I look at what's out there, purely from an electrical engineering perspective, everything I learned in the early 70s no longer applies, okay? Change, technology, rapid change. It's basically, who was it? Heraclitus, 2,000 years ago, said change is the one constant in life. And I think that's the same for all of us from an engineering perspective, and particularly learning. So I think if I had to highlight any skills for engineers of the future, I would try and highlight towards hybrid education, and that's not just for agricultural engineers, for process engineers in general, where you're looking at team development, you're looking at pulling all of these things together as distinct from a single siloed skill, be that agriculture, chemical, environmental, or whatever. I think being able to handle new processes, new technology, being able to work in teams, get that message across, I think that becomes a critical skill for engineers of the future. What is the role of voluntary sustainable schemes as the new European legislation regarding deforestation affecting to the UK? It's early days on that one. To the best of my knowledge, it has only become law in the EU about 3 weeks ago. And there's a lot of contention with it because now it's been required for reporting in terms of financials and everything else. So I think it's early days for it yet. With specific reference to deforestation, I'm not 100% sure on what it's looking at. I think the UK has also got to think things forward going forward. I mean, Henry Dimbleby's The Plan from 2 years ago, I mean, he spent 2 years on it. It's, for those of you who haven't seen it, it's really worth looking at. You look at the research, you look at the detail that's in it. But of course, when he produced it to government, they took one look at it and says, whoops, no. And they haven't applied any of it, which I think is a mistake. I think going forward from, well, some of those points that we outlined in that lecture, you know, certainly obesity, certainly local produce, there's a whole load of elements that have got to be looked at from, I won't say global, but from a regional perspective for the UK. Some of the subsidies, are they misguided going into animals? Should they be coming back more towards better health foods, schools feeding programs? I mean, I understand that food as a subject in high school was taken off the syllabus because the safety officers were worried about students working with Bunsen burners. Now, I don't know how accurate that is, but it's the wrong approach. You know, food education has got to be an integral part of children's development. And I think that's going to be, hopefully, that's going to be a flag going forward for the future, that we can actually look at changing where we've come from over the past 50 years.
Hi, Seamus. Brian's got his hand up.
Yes, Brian.
Brian Matthew.
Thank you very much, Seamus. Most interesting and upbeat kind of way, looking at the way forward. I would just caution in some ways, because having seen the effects of unfettered capitalism on agriculture in Central America from some years ago, where coffee workers, for example, were being paid as little as $1 a day, and the effect that that had on their families in terms of abject poverty and malnutrition and all of those things. And then traveling a little bit further, that was in Honduras, and then traveling a little bit further south into Costa Rica, which has had a democracy for 170 years or something, and seeing essentially the same coffee workers who were then being paid between $19 and $25 a day for the same work. It just showed what exploitation can do to people. But that's just kind of looking at that. But I mean, I'm looking also for this country and the way forwards in terms of regenerative agriculture from farms, but also vertical farms and carbon capture, so that we see CO2 that's being produced from biodigesters, for example, being incorporated into greenhouses to boost agricultural production. So I see lots of good things, but I also see that there can be dangers.
Ryan, 100%. You know, you can probably hear from my accent, I'm Irish, okay? And there's a fellow in Ireland called Murphy, and Murphy had several rules. You get them on T-shirts, etc. But
yeah,
the one I love best is Murphy's golden rule. Mm-hmm. And that's very simple. The man with the gold makes the rules. We're not going to change capitalism, okay? However, I believe that we can have an influence on the industry going forward. I mean, if you take the consolidation that's in the industry, and that's been driven by capital, you know, if you look at the ABCD of the food supply, I mean, they estimate 70–80% of our grain raw materials are controlled by just 4 companies. You know, if you look at food production from an ultra-processed perspective, I mean, there's roughly 15 companies controlling 60% of that output. Okay. The only way that's going to change, I believe, is with consumer knowledge and transparency. And that's what has me a little bit upbeat, that, you know, while we all moan and groan about the internet and social media and it is creating a transparency out there in the industry that has never been there before. You know, and you look, you know, you were talking about the coffee situation, and I mean, that's the same throughout the world. You know, if you look at what Oxfam have achieved with their campaign, or I don't know if you've seen, there's a recent one that's worth looking up. It's an organization called the Bite Back, very appropriately named. And they're putting pressure on companies. In fact, I seen a post there 2 days ago from the guy that actually put the, what's the name? Oh, I can't recall there. That actually put the food plan together. And what he was saying was that the CEO of Nestle, the CEO of, I think, Danone, and a few more of them are actually starting now to come together to say, how can we make more sustainability, or how can we introduce more sustainable food into the industry? And I think the key driver for that is going to be consumerism. And, you know, hopefully, and maybe it's optimistic, but, you know, going back to that quote of mine, you know, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. You know, we're seeing major growth from smaller companies, you know, with growth rates of 10 to 15%, whereas in the past 8 to 10 years, the big food guys, their average growth rate's only been 1.8%. So it is shifting, Brian. Maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but I think the push for price, profit, price, taste, and convenience at a profit, I think that's changing now more into health and wellness, and as I said, an overall transparency. that just hasn't been there before. And I think that's a good thing.
Sure, you've got the war in Ukraine, though, and real fears about food security internationally, and the need.
That goes back to the way it's being controlled, and it goes back to the whole capitalism story. You know, it's the consolidation of companies. You know, I mean, the likes of, well, as I said, the ABCs and what is it, Arthur Daniels, Bunge, Cargill, and I mean, Cargill's overall turnover is higher than about 50, 60 companies. You know, they're controlling that whole global side. And again, I think I'm much more localized look at different things, particularly say from a UK perspective, I think can really assist, can help with making a start towards actually getting us back towards a more sustainable future system.
Thank you.
Henry Dimbleby. That's who I couldn't think of.
Okay. Yeah, if there's no more questions, then I'll draw things to a close. So thank you, Seamus, for an excellent presentation and taking the time out to do that for us today. It's very much appreciated by all. Thanks to everybody for joining. I hope you'll join us for our next lecture on the 11th of June, where we'll be joined by Richard Earle from PSD Agronomy, who will be talking about sports pitch surface design, which I think should be really interesting. So all I have to say is thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.